Hi, I'm Kira Yakubov, and I'm a sex therapist.
Hi, I'm Amanda Weeks and I'm a pelvic therapist.
So today we're going to talk about a question that came up from someone who submitted it anonymously. It was, is it normal for your sex drive to lower after having a baby, and is there anything to help or improve it?
Yes, I love this question. I feel like it's a great question to hear your perspective as a sex therapist, and then some of the things that I might be considering as the pelvic therapist. So it was great.
So I think just first to go off is it's totally normal, super common and expected. And I think at any stage in life, our sex drive is going to fluctuate, which is to be expected, right? Because we're changing, our life circumstances are always changing. So it's totally normal as our body is growing and moving and giving life, it's going to look and feel a lot different.
Yes, I think that's something that a lot of people sort of miss in this huge transition. You know, they're in a rush to be back to what their normal sort of is, and maybe not giving themselves and their body full time to heal and to adjust to the huge change, that just occurred not only within their body, but within the relationship with their partner, family, friends, everything.
Yeah, so like really managing new expectations, right? So what that's going to look like within the relationship too is a great point. I think a few things to consider is that our sex drive is not always going to look the same, right? So there is spontaneous kind of arousal, and then there's also responsive arousal. So that spontaneous is kind of like, maybe you're just like sitting around and something just hits your head like, oh, I'm like feeling kind of horny, or I'm aroused, or I'm like wanting my partner, and it seems pretty random. And I think that spontaneous sex drive is what we see on TV a lot as normal,
Mhm.
and that doesn't always happen. And then the responsive type is there's actually something going on in your environment with your partner that is a cue, right? So whether it's like cuddling, or they're like saying something sweet to you, or literally like touching you in an affectionate way, and you're responding to that. So I think it's important to consider that they're very different and they show up differently throughout life too.
And I think that's so key, that education piece, because most people don't know much about their body in general. So, it's not something that they typically talk about until maybe they have a problem. And unfortunately, after this transition of birth, sometimes this does become a problem for any number of reasons. Whether that is, something that occurred during pregnancy or birth, um, or is it just from stress or lack of sleep, or just you're kind of touched out and changing roles. That is something that people need to kind of understand a little bit better, I think. And that education piece is huge.
Yeah. And it seems like being kind of patient with yourself, right? Like managing the expectations of what's the new norm gonna look like, and also between you and a partner, if you have a partner, right? After giving birth and having a child, is that it doesn't necessarily mean you're not attracted to your partner. It doesn't mean that you should be feeling aroused now that the 6 weeks or whatever the recommended time period was that you're physically clear to have sex, right? It that
That
doesn't
6 weeks
really.
time is so crazy. I try to tell people to not, stick to that 6 weeks. It's when you feel ready and you feel excited again, or are thinking about having some intimate time with your partner. It's not at 6 weeks, you go home and get it on. Like it might take some more preparation than before.
Yeah, and I think being kind of compassionate with yourself that it's going to look different for every person, and to kind of check in with your body, right? Like, when are you feeling relaxed? When are you feeling like appreciated or loved? And what turns you on and turns you off is going to look really different from before than now, right? So, like, having a screaming baby in the background, probably not going to do it for you, right? Like,
No. Yeah, and I think, I would tell someone who asked this question is try to find the times that you are the most relaxed. So, it might look a little different. You might not have, a full afternoon to go to yoga class and get a massage and, meet your girlfriends for coffee or a drink. But can it look like, 15 minutes alone to take a shower or to do a face mask? Like just spending some time with yourself and acknowledging that this is time for myself, and somebody else, it's okay for somebody else to take care of the baby, or to do your laundry or something that might feel really pressing but can always wait.
And I think that's a great point of that self-care and also pleasure, right? Because I think that a lot of the time, women in society, whether directly or indirectly, has put this pressure that having a sexual interaction is about pleasing our partner, right? And now you have another human that you have to take care of and be responsible for. And thinking about sex being your pleasure could go all the way to the bottom of the list. And it's a lot of the times women may think like, well, I don't have a sex drive, but I know my partner might want to. And then there's this added pressure to like, well, I should want to. Why don't I? I need to get myself in the mood. And they really kind of forget the whole point is that it's a mutually satisfying experience. And that if you're not prioritizing your own pleasure outside of sex, it's going to be really hard to tap into that while you are in that space.
That's really, so what do you recommend to people when, you're trying to encourage them to tap into their own pleasure?
So I think there's a lot of playfulness that comes with pleasure, right? It's like being very present and in the moment. Because when we have a laundry list of a million things to do, even if we think about like if I'm doing a face mask, which is a great idea, right? But if we're still thinking about the things we have to do when the face mask is over, are we really relaxing, right? It's like having, even if it is like 10, 15 minutes where you're in a space alone, uninterrupted if possible, right? Like being as comfortable and checking in with all your senses, right? So like, am I laying down comfortably? Are the sheets soft? Like, what does my skin feel like? Like, is there a nice breeze coming in? Is there like a really sensual candle lit next to me, right? Like, am I fantasizing? Am I being playful and like laughing and dancing, right? So I think it's like remembering to just like be you in a moment so that you kind of tap in with that present feeling in your senses while you are enjoying sex or however sex looks like for you and your partner or alone.
Well, yeah. I love that tip about your own thinking about kind of what does it for you. Like what made you happy before having a baby or before becoming a mom? Like try to think back onto that. And, that might kickstart some like feelings of sexiness or desire.
Mm-hmm. And I also think another thing to consider is that we sometimes we think of sex being that's the only time we are touching or being affectionate with one another, and that puts a lot of pressure on it again, right? So for women particularly, it's really important to have like a buildup, right? There's an emotional piece and there's a physical piece and a connection to a partner. So if you are not touching and kissing and hugging or cuddling besides when you're only initiating sex and your sex drive is lower, there's nothing really like prepping you to get there, right? So I think like maintaining that physical intimacy outside of sex is super important too, just to feel close to your partner.
Yes. And the acknowledgement that the hormones that you go through after birth and, if you're breastfeeding can really throw that system out of whack, like your natural lubrication system. So you might not be able to get lubricated or wet as easily as
Mm-hmm.
before. And that's okay, right?
Yeah.
It might take longer, or there might be other things you can do, like lube, lube, lube.
Yes.
What I want to tell everyone, like that might be something that is a new normal for you during this time. And that's okay.
Mm-hmm. I love that. There's nothing wrong with lube. And I think even if a woman or a person is not dry or anything, even starting out with that is great. Because thinking about if you are being if it's harder for you to be responsive to touch, it may actually hurt if you are dry to do anything. So even just having that first like interaction of let me just put on some lube, and then it just makes everything literally become more smoother, the whole interaction, right?
Yeah.
And it's not on your mind to am I wet enough? Am I producing enough lubrication? Is there something wrong with me? Like, because look, now you're out of the moment, you're out of the sensations again, and you're worried about your performance.
Yes. That's, I think, one of the easiest things. If I was going to give this person a tip, is, introduce, if you weren't using it before, introduce, a pH balanced or organic lube into your routine, because, that really just does help things move along. And I think you're totally right. Like, it gives you one less thing to worry about at that time. You're already afraid, like, is the baby going to wake up? Or do we have enough time? Are my breasts going to leak if I'm breastfeeding? There's so many things. And taking that out is definitely a good idea. But I will say, I want to make sure that people know that, sex shouldn't be painful
No.
unless it's something you're into, which is fine too.
Unless
But
it's consensual, right? And that's what you're
correct.
looking for.
Correct. But otherwise, it really shouldn't be painful. So if you're having some pain after sex and it doesn't resolve easily with lubrication and some of those self-care and stress management techniques we talked about, then, it might be worthwhile to kind of seek out some assistance with that.
Hmm. And I also think with that too is like how you mentioned, like breast leaking, is that your body is not only now responding to your own urges and needs, it's responding to your baby's needs.
Mhm.
So I think our body parts are, the function is a little bit different, right? Where breasts may be a sexual thing in the past, now it's like a dual functionality. So maybe that part of your body doesn't really want to be touched anymore, or maybe it does. So I think like checking in again with yourself, like what other body parts that aren't the typical, I guess, sexy parts to touch are still able to turn you on and still feel pleasurable. I think like pleasure instead of thinking of sex is really important
Hmm.
aspect.
Yeah, so I'm curious, I get to work with individuals, but you often get to work with people as a couple. And, I think this is something that might be hard for partners to kind of understand, right? So partners usually already kind of have a hard time grasping this huge change that, a woman has gone through after birth. And then they are usually trying to get, back into kind of how their
Hmm.
sex life or intimate life was before. So how do you recommend kind of communicating with a partner these changes or concerns that people might have?
Sure. So I think obviously there needs to be like a space of safety and understanding, and just being able to openly express like these are the changes I'm having in my body. I'm not always going to be feeling the way I used to feel. And there's a lot to take in that it's not a personal thing, right? I know that a lot of partners might feel like, well, I'm not getting any more attention, or maybe they're not attracted to me. I don't matter, right? And that this is a phase or a time period where expectations have to shift a little bit. And I think also working together, right? Like when I see couples and one partner has a lower sex drive, it's not the one partner's job to fix their sex drive, right? Like our sex drives are kind of bouncing off our partner and how we feel and the connection we have in our relationship, whether there's a lot of conflict or stress, or if there's a lot of connection and understanding. So the dynamic of the relationship heavily plays into our sex drive too. So having the partner be on board and part of this process and experience is really important. And it helps them understand a lot of things, like the educational piece too, but also learning how to touch each other in a different way that isn't necessarily penetrative sex, like expanding the view of what pleasure and intimacy can look like between the two of them.
Yeah. intimacy can look so different after a baby, right? So some other ways to establish intimacy, it's like the things that we talked about before, helping around the house or helping doing things for baby so that the mom can have a little bit of extra time to kind of connect with herself, and de-stress, right? When your body is super heightened and stressed, it's really hard to kind of push those feelings aside, and to feel sexy or intimate and ready to start something like that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm really happy for this question. I think we covered a lot, and I think that maybe in our next video, if we get some other different types of question, we can kind of go over that too.
Yes, I love it.
All right. Bye,
All right, thank you. Bye.
guys.